In Tennessee, prison nurse Jennifer Hyatt finally finds true love in a man behind bars.
Their eyes met, and she said, "I'm in love."
George had a very long and violent criminal history, but there was something exciting in him, and Jennifer fell under his spell.
Good morning, my baby doll. Good morning, baby.
And when the system tries to keep them apart, she is willing to break all the rules to be with her man.
George yells, "Shoot, shoot," and Jennifer begins firing.
Anything for them to be together, she was gonna do. Maybe kill for him.
Go!
And later, after a difficult childhood on the streets of Chicago, Latasha Pulliam meets a man who fulfills her dark desires.
It was an unfortunate union. It appeared that Latasha and Dwight were using each other for benefits.
It was a case of torture and murder.
She was willing to go the extra mile for him and do whatever she needed to do, even kill.
There are hundreds of thousands of women in prison at any given time in the U.S. These are the true stories of women who committed heinous crimes in the name of love. For my man. From an early age, West Jordan, Utah native Jennifer Forsythe dreamed about falling in love and having the perfect relationship until she saw her own parents' union crumble.
Her parents divorced very early, and in many ways, she felt that perhaps it was her fault. We see this with many children. They blame themselves. It also causes self-esteem and self-worth issues.
Those feelings continue into her teen years as she goes from one dead-end relationship to another, consistently mending a broken heart.
Jennifer was drawn to men who would exert control. There were patterns of abuse, both physical abuse, sexual abuse, mixed in with bouts of substance abuse and alcohol abuse. Every relationship she had was set up for failure.
As she hits her 20s, she finds comfort working as a nurse's aide at a local hospital. But the joy she feels from helping others isn't enough to fill the hole in her heart.
Jennifer needed a man in order to give her a feeling of self-worth. By herself, she did not feel that she was worth much.
She gives marriage a shot, twice, but it isn't long before she finds herself in the singles club again.
Jennifer was very naive and very easily manipulated. I think maybe she was lonely at that point in her life.
So that winter, after visiting friends in Tennessee, the 31-year-old decides a change is in order. She pulls up stakes and makes the 1,500-mile move from West Jordan, Utah to Dyersburg, Tennessee, 3 hours west of Nashville. It's like a breath of fresh air.
This change of scenery was a way for her to erase her very negative past and now have a better future, especially when it came to being in a relationship with a man.
Right away, Jennifer focuses on her career and soon gets her nursing license. Her first job is at the Northwest Correctional Complex in Tiptonville, Tennessee. But she's not worried.
The Northwest Correctional Complex was a very low security type of prison. It's more about rehabilitation. This is not a scary place at all for Jennifer to work, but maybe even a very hopeful place.
There, she enjoys administering medications and overseeing many of the inmates' health issues. It's the last place she expects to find love. Then, just 2 weeks into the job, Jennifer's heart almost skips a beat when 33-year-old inmate George Hyatt is assigned to clean up the clinic where she spends most of her time.
George was a good-looking young man who was fit, who was charismatic. When she first saw George, their eyes locked across the room, and she knew that they were going to be together.
So desperate for love, she ignores the fact that he's only served 2 years of a 35-year sentence for a series of crimes going back more than 15 years.
Anybody who's committed 2 aggravated robberies, multiple burglaries, and escape, by definition, they're a dangerous person. Not someone you'd take to Sunday dinner.
But she doesn't care, especially when he gives her constant praise, telling her how beautiful she is.
If he knew what to say to make her feel good, to appreciate it, make her feel wanted, you know, had her thinking, hey, this guy's a good guy even though he's in prison.
When George and Jennifer met, they were actually able to feed into each other's needs. George was extremely lonely for female company, and she had had all of these negative experiences in love. Here finally was someone who was willing to shower her with attention.
Jennifer can't get enough of the charismatic prisoner. She even thinks of little ways to make his life on the inside better.
She did things for him. Lots of things, including some outside food, and he had a cell phone. And I think the cell phone came in a peanut butter jar.
She put her career on the line by kissing George, by holding hands with him, by being inseparable. She lost all focus. She lost all perspective. It was about this love affair that she was having. She didn't care about the consequences.
She hadn't had the job very long. She was already willing to break the rules. And that just shows how hard that Jennifer was falling for George, that she was willing to put her job on the line to try and take care of him or to bring him the things that he wanted.
Soon, the two profess their love to each other, and Jennifer has never felt so complete.
I love you too.
She was deeply, madly in love with George. He makes me feel good. He makes me feel wanted. And I think maybe George has some love for her. But I also think George loved what she could do for him.
Unfortunately, their love affair is about to hit a serious stumbling block when she sneaks in something else for her man.
Jennifer had smuggled in food, shrimp, to George. She was caught in the prison with that, and it was contraband, and she was immediately fired for that infraction.
But the lovelorn nurse is not about to give up her soulmate. And when it seems like the entire world's trying to keep these lovers apart, they'll risk everything to be together.
She was willing to do anything for George, maybe even die for him.
She was under his spell, no question about it.
In Tiptonville, Tennessee, prison nurse Jennifer Forsythe has finally found love in convicted felon George Hyatt. But their secret affair is discovered when she's caught smuggling him some carry-out shrimp and is immediately fired and banned from the prison.
You can't have people sneaking in anything to prisoners. I mean, because today is shrimp, tomorrow is a clip to a 9mm.
Because of the violation, George is transferred to Riverbend Maximum Security Prison, 3 hours east, near Nashville. Jennifer is devastated but determined to keep their relationship alive.
Even though he was in prison for 35 years, maybe she thought there was a light at the end of the tunnel where one day we can be together.
After 6 months, she moves north to Hendersonville, just 25 miles from George. During the day, she works as a live-in nurse for an elderly couple. But at night, all she can do is dream of her lover.
You think that she would have learned her lesson, but no. She actually followed him to this other prison, moved into this town in order to now even step up and escalate that relationship. She's going to stand by him as he goes through his trials and tribulations.
Unfortunately, the move turns out to be in vain, since she can't visit her love in prison without being legally married, and her desperation grows.
They still communicated over the phone, but she didn't have any ability to have physical contact with George any longer.
To fix the problem, the two decide to tie the knot in a no-contact prison ceremony. Even though there are no conjugal visits allowed, they'll take what they can get, filling the gaps between visits with long phone calls. Despite the maximum security, George is still able to use the cell phone he snuck in.
He would be on the phone with Jennifer every waking moment, and I mean that quite literally. She'd talk to him 10, 11, 12 hours a day.
Hey. Good morning, my baby doll. Good morning, baby. Wake you up. I'll call you back. I love you.
But carrying on their love this way isn't enough for Jennifer, and she decides she can't wait 33 years to feel his touch.
She wanted her husband, George Hyatt, out of prison. She wanted him for herself.
And with that, she knows there's only one way for the two to be together. She will help her man escape.
Because Jennifer was so in love with George, she didn't give any thoughts to the consequences. She just wanted to be with George, and hey, in order for us to be together, I have to get him out of prison.
George acts surprised, but it was something he was secretly hoping for from the start.
Whether he loved Jennifer or not is irrelevant because George had been looking for the right dupe, the right person, the right victim to be able to break him out of jail.
That's when he comes up with the perfect plan. In just a few weeks, he has a court hearing for an outstanding robbery charge at the Rowan County Courthouse in Kingston, 2 hours away. He knows it's an ideal place to flee.
And I think George knew that it wouldn't be hard to escape from the Rowan County Courthouse because, I mean, he had been there plenty of times.
He tells Jennifer that after the hearing, 2 guards will escort him from the courthouse back to the prison van across a large, open, and unsecured parking lot. It would be the perfect time for her to spring him from state custody.
He knew that the correctional officers were vulnerable to an escape at that moment of getting into the van.
I love you.
She's almost giddy with anticipation.
I think Jennifer's idea of the plan would be that the guards would just hand George over and they would be able to ride off and to live their happy fairy tale life.
As it gets closer to the court date, the dutiful wife gathers the supplies they'll need for the breakout.
She got medical equipment, she got food, she got maps to figure out where they were going to go after this happened.
George told Jennifer that she needed to get a gun and she needed to start practice shooting.
She also acquires 2 vehicles. She plans to use her own SUV and borrows her elderly employer's minivan to leave town with. Everything is in place and ready to go.
They were going to drop the first car, get into the second car that was supplied, and that was going to be their escape vehicle.
Finally, after several weeks of planning, the big day comes. Around 9 a.m., Jennifer parks her SUV in the parking lot of the Rowan County Courthouse and enters the courtroom. George pleads guilty and is sentenced to 6 more years. Jennifer knows that's her cue.
The plan was then pretty quickly put into place. She left the courtroom in a hurry.
She knew where the prison van was. She ran to her car and got in position. She got her gun, made sure it was ready to go, and knew exactly what she was going to do.
She begins to sweat, but knows it's too late to back out now. She has no idea that what she's about to do will have dire consequences.
She sees the guards bringing George out of the courthouse. She hops out.
As the 2 officers prepare to load their convict into the van, she nervously points the gun at Officer Wayne Cotton Morgan.
She draws down on him, and George says, shoot, shoot. And Cotton says, no, don't do this, and raises his hands, and she fires.
She shoots Mr. Morgan. He goes down. He's on the ground.
He was shot in the gut.
Without missing a beat, Morgan's partner, Officer Larry Harris, reacts.
Larry Harris drew his gun and returned fire.
She starts firing. Harris, he empties his weapon and gets Morgan's weapon to continue firing at Jennifer.
Everyone in the courthouse is frozen in fear.
And there are bullets flying everywhere. She's shooting, Mr. Harris is shooting.
As Harris continues to fire at her, she jumps in her SUV and drives to where George is hiding. Hunkered behind a car, and he jumps in the back seat. Jennifer immediately hits the gas pedal.
They took off down out of the parking lot, bullets flying by, and made a getaway. I mean, they made a getaway.
With her adrenaline pumping hard, she only just notices that she's been shot.
Jennifer is bleeding. There was blood all over the vehicle.
And later, in Chicago, Latasha Pulliam sacrifices her soul to please her man's sickening desires.
She had never gone to that extreme before.
She would do anything that he was doing because they were simpatico. They were together. They were partners, even in something that was so heinous.
George Hyatt has a history of using his charms to escape authorities.
One of George Hyatt's convictions for aggravated robbery involved a convenience store robbery and led to an escape from a patrol car. A woman allegedly helped him in that escape as well.
Shoot him! After shooting a prison guard and freeing her husband of 3 months from incarceration in Roane County, Tennessee, Jennifer Hyatt realizes she's been shot twice.
Officer Harris did manage to shoot Jennifer in the buttocks with a through-and-through wound, and also to graze her on the face.
But there's no way she and George can stop for help.
Going to the hospital at that point was out of the question for both of them.
Instead, their first stop is the deli, where she stashed the minivan with all of their supplies.
They transfer vehicles. Jennifer is bleeding. There was blood all over the vehicle.
They immediately hop on the highway.
For anyone got a grasp of what had just happened, they were already on the interstate, headed out of town.
It is quite clear that Jennifer is in way over her head, but she's got the prize. She ended up getting wounded and was bleeding profusely, but she's got George, and she's going to see this thing through.
At the courthouse, law enforcement quickly figures out who's involved and begins a nationwide manhunt.
When you shoot an officer, it gets the attention of every other officer. You can count on that.
After driving 250 miles north, the two fugitives cross state lines and pull over at a hardware store in Erlanger, Kentucky, to take care of something they hadn't thought of.
George was still shackled and handcuffed. They convinced the customer who was walking out that they weren't able to go in. They gave him money, and he agreed to go in, buy a hacksaw, and bring it back out.
With George now free from his restraints, husband and wife spend the night in a local motel down the street as Jennifer dresses her wound. Despite her injury, she can hardly wait to consummate her marriage.
Jennifer was in a romantic fog. Even though she had been shot, even though law enforcement were hot on their heels, she still believed that these days, these hours that they were together, was the culmination of everything that she had ever lived for.
Until she turns on the news and learns that Officer Morgan lost his life in the gun battle.
It was at this point that she knew how dangerous and crazy this thing really was, because the person she didn't even intend to shoot was dead, and that her paradise was going to come to a crashing end. This is the first moment when she really started realizing the severity of her actions.
This young woman, without a criminal record, has just become a fugitive of the law. And even worse, a murderer. The next morning, with police closing in, the couple throws the gun and George's prison jumpsuit in the hotel dumpster and ditches their minivan. They decide on a different mode of transportation.
They had convinced a cab driver to take them from Kentucky to a hotel in Columbus, Ohio. And he wasn't aware about who the two people were.
Now 10 hours north of the courthouse, the couple settles in for the night. But their happiness will be short-lived.
The cab driver drives away thinking, are these the two people that I've been hearing about on the news?
It clicks in his head, and then he contacts the authorities.
The next morning, U.S. Marshals surround the Hyatt's hotel and make their presence known by calling their room and warning them to surrender. Surprisingly, the two give up without a fight.
Can't help but believe that part of the reason is because of her injury.
Jennifer is barely recognizable after dyeing her hair the night before. Extradited back to Tennessee, they both risk going to trial for multiple charges, including first-degree murder. But she is still in her romantic fog. While awaiting her court date in a cold cell, she finds comfort reminiscing about the few days she was with her husband and writes about their adventures together.
She was kind of referring to her and George as this modern-day Bonnie and Clyde.
This was a woman who was in complete denial and was delusional regarding what was happening in her life at that point. She chose to focus all of her thoughts, all of her energy on George in those brief moments that they had together.
She continued to describe those 2 or 3 days that they had together as the best time of her life.
After being separated from George for months, his hold on her finally weakens. Just before her trial, she files to end her 3-month marriage.
I think it took a good year for her to begin to come around, to realize that George had duped her. And as much in love as she was with George Hyatt, She then flipped and despised him.
A year later, Jennifer Hyatt pleads guilty to first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and facilitation of an escape in exchange for testifying against her husband. She's sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole and apologizes to Morgan's family for her actions.
It was very emotional that day when she pled guilty, and she did express some remorse for what she had done.
Knowing his wife is going to testify against him, George Hyatt also pleads guilty to first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and felony escape. He receives life without parole. Jennifer is now living in the Tennessee prison for women in Nashville. She has the rest of her life to think about how love led her astray.
There's no reason in the world she would have done all the things she did, have thrown away all the things she threw away if she didn't actually love George.
The irony of all of this is that this romance started in jail, and now she's going to have to spend the rest of her life in jail. She was so in love with George and the excitement that that relationship brought that she was willing to sacrifice everything.
He led her down the primrose path and ruined her life. Of course, she was a willing participant. Without George Hyatt, Jennifer Hyatt would never have committed this crime. Love drives people to do things that often get them in trouble.
Jennifer Hyatt regrets going against her true nature to be with her love and is paying the price. Latasha Pulliam finds herself involved with a man who puts her on a path of self-destruction. Southside Chicago has always had a reputation for being a rough part of town.
It was what would be referred to as a low-income area. It was sort of on the decline, but we were exposed to, you know, just violence, drug use, domestic violence, poverty.
It's a less than desirable atmosphere for anyone to live in, but this is all young Latasha Pulliam has ever known. As she grows to adolescence, life for the misguided youth continues to go downhill.
This young girl was subjected to a lot of neglect and abuse. She had been beaten and or raped. The false and dysfunctional love that she was taught was the only love that she knew.
When she's 13 years old, Latasha is removed from her mother's house by Child Services and placed in group homes. But that doesn't stop her from venturing out on her own.
She ran away from them. She would sleep in abandoned buildings, lay her head wherever she could.
By the time she's 18 years old, she has had 2 children from 2 different men. But she's not ready for motherhood, and a vicious cycle of abuse repeats itself.
One of her, it was an infant daughter, was brought to the hospital with burns on her body.
She had also been sexually abused.
I would say the lines would have been blurred with Latasha from her history of being abused for so many years. Most abused become abusers.
Latasha loses custody of both of her children and never lays eyes on them again. With nothing left for her, she starts living on the streets. It seems life couldn't get any worse, but it's about to, when she meets a man that pushes her to the edge.
This was a crime that was just horrific to even imagine.
Once they were together, she was willing to cross a line that she had never crossed before.
In Southside Chicago, growing up in a physically and sexually abusive environment has taken its toll on 18-year-old Latasha Pulliam, resulting in her losing custody of 2 children and becoming homeless.
Latasha was a woman who had been used by so many people in the worst ways. And so now this began to set her into a mindset of, okay, now I've got to survive. She just wanted to be needed by someone. And this gave her her mission. This gave her her purpose.
After a year of living on the street, she clings to a 47-year-old man named Dwight Jordan. The two quickly discover their shared interests and start spending more and more time together.
It was an unfortunate union. It appeared that Latasha and Dwight were around each other for purposes of using each other for benefits. I believe they loved drugs and were connected to one another in the pursuit of drugs.
Latasha was drawn to Dwight because here was the father figure that she had not had in her life. Dwight found this young woman who can bring him drugs. But more than anything, they were both lonely. And this is the classic case of where misery loves company.
They eventually find a home together in an abandoned apartment building on Eberhard Street and consider themselves lucky.
Prior to them moving in there were families in there, but yeah, it was a recently abandoned. So it had power, water for maybe the first 6 months that they lived there.
The pair keep to themselves mostly, but are seen around the neighborhood from time to time.
Dwight always appeared to kind of be an angry man to me. And Latasha would walk by, look at us and give us a wave and walk in the house. You figured they were on their luck, and that's why they were staying in there for a moment.
After a few months, the honeymoon phase starts to wear off, and the two fight over their next score.
There's no more Dwight, that was it.
You could increasingly hear Dwight and Latasha argue violently, aggressively, lots of swearing, cussing, things breaking. He was basically upset that they didn't have any drugs and she needed to go get some.
Anxious to keep her new man happy, Latasha does whatever it takes and hits the streets again.
I truly believe Dwight manipulated and pushed Tasha to go supply the drugs by any means necessary, including prostitution, probably theft.
Latasha confused needing as loving. And so when Dwight needed her to go out there and get those drugs, she saw that as, he needs me. Therefore, in my mind, he loves me.
As the months spent with her new man go by in a drug-fueled haze, she finds it harder and harder to please him and loses what's left of her humanity.
When you saw Latasha during those times that she wasn't in her right mind, there was no personality in her face. She was on missions to either get drugs or use them after she got them.
The 19-year-old begins to sink further into a bottomless pit of despair, until one day she hits rock bottom. Around 3:30 p.m., Latasha is outside of her apartment building looking to score drugs when she spots one of her neighbor's kids, Shenosha Richards.
Well, Shenosha was 6 years old. She had an older sister who was about 10 years older than she. And her mother knew Dwight Jordan for a number of years, and I think she knew Latasha for about a year.
That's when she spots an opportunity that might make her man happy. She slowly approaches Shenosha and quickly befriends the little girl.
Not necessarily pre-planned. The girl could just happen to have been there at that time.
She lures her away from her friends and convinces the 6-year-old to watch a movie at her apartment.
In some ways, this child may have been symbolic of the innocence that she lost herself, the innocence that she lost in her own children when they were taken from her.
Unfortunately, Shenosha has no idea what's in store for her.
Latasha told little Shenosha, just go into that room and watch TV. Latasha knew what she was doing on a conscious level, but subconsciously, she may not even be aware of the motivation.
She leaves the little girl alone with her boyfriend and proceeds to the kitchen to do some cocaine. Within minutes, she hears screaming coming from the bedroom and returns to see her man taking advantage of the situation.
When she came back, Dwight was molesting Shenosha.
Latasha brought Shenosha to Dwight because she wanted to offer up something to him and to get more of his love, or what she thought was love. And Latasha was willing to take things one step further.
In an effort to please her man, she decides to do the unthinkable. And it won't stop there. She's about to get her hands dirty like never before.
This is probably the most horrific crime I've ever seen.
What Latasha was trying to do was to show him that she was all in.
In Chicago, Latasha Pulliam joins her boyfriend Dwight Jordan in molesting 6-year-old Shenosha Richards.
I think it's unconscionable that someone would take a 6-year-old off the street and to bring him into a place to abuse him sexually.
Finally, after what seems like an eternity for the young girl, the couple ends the assault and acts as if it was nothing.
Dwight told Latasha to take Shenosha home. Then he left the apartment and went back outside to drink with some friends.
Take her home.
She knew that Dwight was expecting her to fix this. What was she gonna do? How was she going to explain this? Now, this thing was on her doorstep. She could identify both her and Dwight.
Then Shenosha says something that will be her ultimate undoing.
Shenosha said, "Do you know I love you, Latasha? And the only person I gotta tell is my mother."
I won't tell anyone except Mom.
Knowing that Shenosha can identify the two of them, Latasha needs to think fast to protect herself and Dwight.
She decided that it was safer or beneficial for them to try to silence her. The only option was to try to kill her.
Determined to make her man proud, she grabs the closest weapon she can find.
Latasha got a TV cord around Shenosha's neck and strangles Shenosha.
And to make sure the little girl can never rat her tormentors out, she finishes the job.
She had a hammer, so she bludgeoned her to death. This is probably the most horrific crime I've ever seen. For me personally, disbelief, astonishment, shock, and sorrow.
Her life had been destroyed when she was just a child. And so her feelings were gone a long time ago. And therefore, it wasn't hard for her to take that one last step, something that she had never done before, taking a human life.
Meanwhile, Shenosha's mom, Mabel, and Shenosha's 16-year-old sister, Tabitha, are worried sick when she hasn't returned home after a couple of hours.
Her older sister, she went looking for her, and someone told her they had seen Shenosha go into this building with Natasha.
She was walking around and she runs into Dwight.
So as not to raise suspicion, he takes her to the apartment. Tabitha knocks. A few moments go by. Inside, she hears someone at her door and knows she can't leave Shenosha's body laying out. So in a panic, she looks for a place to stash her.
Latasha put Shenosha in the garbage can to hide her.
She answers the door trying to remain calm and sees Dwight and Shenosha's sister standing there.
Is Shenosha here? No.
Tabitha asks where her sister is, but Latasha immediately comes up with a lie.
Latasha gave some story about Shenosha leaving the area with somebody else.
Tabitha heads back to tell her mom, while Latasha breaks the news of Shenosha's demise to Dwight. The two worry that they might get caught and scramble to get rid of any evidence, like Shenosha's clothes and shoes.
And I think Latasha panicked, and she did not know what to do.
Unaware of what's going on, some neighbors happen to be talking outside of her apartment when they see her open her upstairs bedroom window.
Latasha looked out at us and then dropped a small pair of black shoes. I said, what's she doing with some little shoes? And I guess being too young, we were unable to know that there was something wrong right then. It was just the crazy people that live in that building.
Meanwhile, Tabitha finds her mother down the street and tells her what happened. The two immediately head back to the couple's apartment to confront the shady pair.
They were very suspicious of the fact that something had happened there and that the girl was probably still there.
In all the commotion, the entire neighborhood becomes aware of the missing girl, and a neighbor calls the police. At the couple's rundown apartment, mother and daughter frantically bang on Latasha's door.
Her mother eventually forces her way into the apartment and starts looking for Shenosha. At that point, Latasha decided to take off.
Dwight sticks around but refuses to say anything.
Where is she?
That's when Mabel notices something unsettling on the back porch.
She sees what she thinks is a doll's arm coming out of a garbage can. So she goes over to the garbage can, opens it up.
It was a scream. It was a hurting scream. It was, you'll never forget it.
This isn't the first time that Latasha has brought another female home to please a man.
Latasha had a pattern of luring innocent victims to her men, to feed her men, if you will, in order to keep them. This gave her her purpose.
Mabel Brockman experiences her worst nightmare in Chicago when she opens up the garbage can of her neighbor Latasha Pulliam and her boyfriend Dwight Jordan.
She's the one who sees an arm sticking out of a garbage can and looks in the garbage can and finds her daughter, and she's not breathing. She was bleeding from her head and her other parts of her body where she'd been sexually assaulted.
She carries little Shenosha downstairs into the alley for help.
We began to hear just a deafening scream coming from in the alley. You can tell that scream, there was something wrong. It was a hurting scream. It was, you'll never forget it.
Dwight and Shenosha's sister Tabitha join Mabel, and a crowd immediately starts to gather outside to see what's happening. They are stunned by what they see.
I saw Shenosha's mom holding her daughter, and her body, the way her hands were hanging, her arms were hanging, you could tell she was lifeless. And she began to rock and hold her baby and scream.
No mother should have to go through the experience that she went through.
Meanwhile, during the chaos, Dwight is able to sneak away and blend into the crowd.
The police were there pretty quickly, and a police car took Shenosha to the hospital where they tried to revive her.
Officers quickly talk to neighbors, and it isn't long before they get the names Latasha and Dwight, and a manhunt ensues. Everyone, including neighbors, are scouring the area for them.
Latasha ran to another apartment in the same building complex. And when she heard the cops coming, she knew that she had to make a run for it. She was now in survival mode.
Suddenly, some men hear glass breaking. They look down the alleyway and see Latasha trying to escape.
She looks directly at us. There was no mistaking of who she was. And then she just turned around and she began to run. And that's when the chase began.
They chase after her on foot for a block until they finally corner her in a basement entryway. She doesn't put up a fight as she's immediately arrested. Meanwhile, Dwight's hiding spot is exposed when a neighbor points him out to an officer.
The policeman found him in a crowd of people outside, asked him to come down to the police station because he was a witness, potential witness.
When police question him, he reluctantly admits that he took part in the rape of Shenosha Richards, but puts most of the blame on his partner in crime.
I think Dwight wasn't given the full explanation of what his participation was. He minimized his participation.
While Latasha and Dwight are being booked, Mabel and Tabitha are at the hospital, praying that Shenosha will recover.
They tried to revive Shenosha at the hospital, but they were unsuccessful.
Realizing there's too much evidence against her, she admits to sexually assaulting Shenosha with her boyfriend and then taking matters into her own hands.
Latasha knew what she had done was just incredibly wrong, and she wasn't going to get away with it. There was nowhere to hide, so she had to fess up once and for all.
Even though she confesses, Latasha goes to trial, and just 2 days later she is found guilty of aggravated unlawful restraint, kidnapping, criminal sexual assault, and murder. Her boyfriend has his trial simultaneously.
We prosecuted him on a theory of accountability. Once you start a crime with somebody, you're accountable for the whole crime.
Dwight Jordan is found guilty of kidnapping, criminal sexual assault, and murder, and is sentenced to life in prison. Latasha receives death and is serving her sentence in Logan Correctional Center in Lincoln, Illinois.
One of the doctors diagnosed Latasha Pulliam as a sexual sadist, that she enjoys giving pain to somebody else during sex.
They say misery loves company, so maybe that's why the abused become abusers, because they want someone else to feel the pain of the abuse where you've gone through it too.
She had never killed anyone before, but now with Dwight in the picture, someone she wanted to protect, someone who she thought loved her, who she felt useful to, what happened, happened. She had been destroyed, and that at some point in her life, because there were no interventions given to her, she was going to destroy someone else.